Thank you for tuning in. This is a Spotlight series. Thank you, Joe Brooks, for having us. CommunityWorksInstitute.org is the place you need to go to find out for professional development services for K through 16 educators. CommunityWorks.org brings you this awesome programming. Joe Brooks does the Friday Spotlight series. I do the Sunday Spotlight series. Community Works Institute brings the classroom to the community and the community to the classroom with different storytelling opportunities, DEI opportunities, and actually recently I heard DAI, which is diversity, anti-racism, and inclusion. So they bring those as well. So please check out their website, communityworksinstitute.org. And there's going to be upcoming institutes for professional development opportunities. I am your host, Zach Ritter. I work as an Associate Dean of Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I also teach a class there about diversity in higher ed. And I met our amazing guest today, Aaron Jones, when I was working at Harvey Mudd College, which is in Southern California, the Claremont colleges. And I just immediately knew this was someone that we had to bring to campus, and the vibes and the intellect and all the things. And I'm also a basketball fan, so we nerded out on basketball. So she's an educator, ran for political office in Washington State. I'm learning new things about her all the time. I just saw that she won an award from Barack Obama's presidency, a high achiever. And we also need to talk about your time in the Netherlands. But I want you to have a chance to introduce yourself. Aaron Jones, thank you so much for coming today.
I am so honored to be here today. Yeah, I love that we had the opportunity to meet through my child who was at your college, and he of course brags on me, like he's my biggest fan, and hey, you need to bring my mom to campus. So I love that that's how I ended up on your campus many years ago when he was an undergrad there. He's now a graduate student at USC. Woo! Second year grad student. That's just so crazy, but I love that I got to know you through that experience, and just felt like the first time we met, like we could have sat and talked all day long about lots of things. And yeah, so I'm really honored to be here today. I am, as you said, I'm a career educator. Have been doing work in K-12 education, but also higher ed for the last 30 years. That's crazy too. I'll be 50 this year. Ugh, I can't even. But I've done work from Philadelphia to South Bend, Indiana, to Columbus, Ohio, to Corvallis, Oregon, Tacoma, Washington, Spokane. And then I worked for the state superintendent for my state for 4 years, worked in school district administration for another 5 years, and then made the crazy decision to run for state superintendent in 2016. Had I known that Hillary Clinton and Trump were going to run against each other, I probably never would have chosen that year to run. But in hindsight, I became the first Black woman in my state to run for statewide office and lost that race by 1 point, which actually right now feels like a gain. It feels like a win, because I don't think there is a win right now for state superintendents in helping schools go back to school and manage this pandemic. And so I feel like that loss has it's afforded me some pretty incredible opportunity to be outside the system, supporting the system, really from early childhood now to higher ed. I've been doing work for the last year online. And so, but I'm also I was a ball player. I played basketball for 40 years in 12 countries, soccer for 20 years in 12 countries. And then now I'm a runner. So I'm trying to run from 50, so I'll be 50 in a few months. And I feel like I'm trying to put in the miles to get away from 50, but it's catching me. But anyway, and I'm a mom of 3 adult children, and my husband and I have been married almost 28 years now.
Wow.
So, and he's also an educator. Dang. So there you have it.
Y'all are powerhouses. I want to be like you if and when I grow up. So my heroine. So, all right. So I have so much to ask you. First, I want to say you're the first person that taught me about bridge building and what that means. And you said you're a bridge builder, which is beautiful. You connect communities, but also it hurts sometimes because people walk on bridges. That always just stood out with me. So first, I just want to say thank you for saying that, because that's the work that we do, and it's amazing and powerful. And then sometimes it hurts because that's what happens in this terrain. Let's take it back a little bit, and you mentioned when you were at Harvey Mudd College about growing up in the Netherlands. Just tell us a little bit about that, and what was that like?
Well, let me tell you how I got there, because I didn't start there. So it may make a lot of sense, particularly in today's context, how I got there, because it really feeds into why I do the work I do. So I was born in a place that most people had never heard of until the spring, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I was born out of the body of a white woman. Obviously not white. So if you're just listening, you can't see me, but I'm a 6 foot tall Black woman with a big old afro. It's red right now. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's orange. But I was born out of the body of a white woman in 1971, and she was forced to give me away. And, you know, if you know anything about history, which of course you do, but some of the listeners may not, until 67, it was illegal for a Black man to marry a white woman in most places in the United States. Even though it was legal by 71, it was still unacceptable in most places in the United States. And I think until the spring, most people would have said the race stuff is in the South. Like, we don't have racial problems in the North until the spring, right? And then it was like, but I knew this 50 years ago. Like, I knew this on the day of my birth. We got some race problems in the North as well. And there were people that knew that long before that. But I was born out of her body. She would send me to the Children's Home Society. So I never got to meet my biological mother. I started life at the Children's Home Society. I was adopted there by 2 Scandinavian Americans who decided to adopt babies no one wanted. And it is no different today, really, than it was 50 years ago. Babies who look like me are not wanted. I mean, we are not adopted at very high rates in Minnesota. But I would be adopted by a white couple whose families were not super excited. I mean, they were in northern Minnesota, people had never seen us. So they had these narratives about Negroes that even good Christian folks had some narratives about Black folks that were not so positive. And so my parents had to wrestle through that as a young couple. And they decided not just to adopt me, but they adopted a little boy too, a year and a half later. So there are 2 of us. And my dad would decide when I was 4 years old, we got to get out of the country. And so his first job offer was actually at the American School of Iran in Tehran, but he ended up declining that job because when the superintendent offered it to him and then said, "Do you have any questions for me?" My nerdy math dad's one question was, "Hey, I have Black children. How do you think your community is going to handle this?" And that superintendent, of course, was not prepared for that question. And he responded in such a way that my father would make it very clear, "I can never work for you. Can never work for you." Unfortunately, he said no, because if you know anything about Iran in the late 70s, of course, terrorists took over the American embassy and the school, and we would have been there. Had my dad not asked that question, I think about this every time I tell my stories. Had my dad not asked that question and had just taken the job because it was his first job offer, we may have ended up there at that time. But he ended up saying no and taking a job at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands, which is, it's not the United Nations school, but it serves the ambassadors to the UN. It serves the State Department from the United States. It serves the Microsoft Europe, Shell Europe, all of the executives' children. And so here I was, this once orphan kid, biracial, presenting as Black, now sitting at tables right next to really powerful people. And that experience, my dad could not have known what that was going to be because he'd never left the United States. He took this sight unseen. I say my dad is one of the bravest people I know. You would never know it looking at him. Like, he's so humble and shy. He's pretty introverted. He's a teacher. He teaches math. So he's good talking about math. Anything else? No, don't talk to me, really. I'd rather be in a book. but my dad is really brave to leave everything in America to give me a different shot at life. I mean, he had no idea. I would meet my first president's wife at 9.
Wow.
Every American president would walk the halls of my school from Jimmy Carter to George Bush.
Wow.
I hosted Barbara Bush my senior year of high school. I spoke in front of the Queen of the Netherlands twice when I was 17 and then again at 18. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, it's stuff that nobody could have, like, if you had told my dad when he was 29, this is what your daughter is going to get to do, like, we all would have said, whatever, there's no way. And, you know, I met Ringo Starr when I was 15 years old. Like, he just happened to be at one of my friends' houses. And so I just got to meet Ringo Starr as a 16 or 17-year-old kid. But what that taught me, though, is that people are people.
Yeah.
Being around really powerful people, first of all, they're not all happy. Just because you're famous and rich does not mean you're happy, does not mean you feel fulfilled, does not mean you have good relationships. And I learned that really early. I also learned that just being rich and being born into powerful families doesn't mean that you're smarter or better. And so I learned, man, I can change the world too. Like, I can make a difference too. And I think as I watched these world leaders around me, I realized quickly, I want to be that. Like, I want my life to matter in a particular way. And so I lived that way, and ended up coming back to America for college. And because I knew I needed a degree from a great school. So almost went to Princeton, didn't get a big enough scholarship. So now that you're in college work, you know, I graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA, 11 AP classes, spoke 4 languages fluently, triple varsity athlete, MVP of all 3 sports, and captain. And Princeton gave me a $1,000 scholarship.
What?
$1,000.
That'll help with books.
Right. So mom and dad are like, yeah, no, not happening. And I felt like my dreams were just completely destroyed, and that, like, I'd done everything. You know, we tell our kids, do this, and this is what'll happen. And I did this and this and this plus some, and it still didn't turn out. But I believe everything happens for a reason. Yesterday, I got to preach at a church in Princeton, New Jersey from Zoom, right back exactly 32 years from the day that I got my letter in March of 1989. I got to preach in a church on Zoom in Princeton, New Jersey yesterday, right next to the college. It's the most amazing experience to look at where my life has taken me. And here right now, I'm back sharing my expertise with y'all in Princeton.
That is
but I discovered racism for the first time when I came to college. I went to Bryn Mawr College and almost committed suicide my freshman year. It was horrible. But yeah, that's a whole nother story in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, I think you may have touched on that story when you were at Mud, but gosh, there's a lot of ways to go here. So say a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people are suffering through mental health crises right now because of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, traumatic racial stress incidences. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's important for folks to hear a little, if you're comfortable sharing that.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you know what I just was training some folks last week and telling their story, the power of storytelling. As a speaker, I don't ever tell stories that will make me cry. I don't rehearse trauma. Yeah. But I'm so far removed from this trauma in my life, and I've done the counseling and I've done the work that I share. But I just, to anyone who's listening or watching right now, don't rehearse your trauma publicly. It's just not a wise idea. And so I'm far enough removed from that I feel like it's a powerful story that I hope will inspire someone. So I came to America at 18 sight unseen. So I'd not visited Bryn Mawr College. And for those of you who don't know Bryn Mawr, it is the sister school to Princeton. You know, all the Ivy League colleges were started for men. And so they had to have these 7 sisters colleges that were for women back in the 1800s. And Bryn Mawr stayed a women's college, and it's a very elite school. And but I didn't have money to come back and visit from Europe because my parents are teachers. We didn't have money. And I learned later, Princeton didn't offer me a big scholarship because they never looked at my financial aid paperwork. They just looked at the name of my high school, and they made the assumption she goes to that rich private school. Well, I was a teacher's kid. I went for free. I didn't. So I show up at Bryn Mawr on a not a full ride scholarship, but a big, kind of like Izzy got to Mud, a really big annual scholarship. But I had never seen campus before. And of course, we didn't have YouTube in the 80s. And so all I'd ever seen was the brochure. And I knew that it was in Philadelphia. And at the time in Europe, we had this show called The Cosby Show. And I loved Claire Huxtable. And The Cosby Show was set in Philadelphia. And so in my mind, like, I'm coming to live in the town where Claire Huxtable lives. And I wanted to be Claire Huxtable so badly. I loved who she was and how she showed up. And of course, he's a hot mess. But I didn't know that then. I just loved her. I really wanted to be like her. And also Will Smith had just become famous. And he was also from Philadelphia. And so in my mind, like, I knew about slavery, I knew about Reconstruction, I knew about Jim Crow, I knew about the Civil Rights Movement. I'd read James Baldwin, Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston, Malcolm X. I mean, I knew all of this stuff. And then I knew Bill Cosby and Will Smith.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, like, we had gone from the Civil Rights Movement to that. And I assumed that's how Black people lived in America. And I was in for an awakening. And I got off a plane in Philadelphia, and Bryn Mawr is not in the city. It's in the 7th wealthiest suburb in America. And it's not like California rich. It's old money, like Mayflower. Like, everyone comes from a Mayflower family. And so that old money is a really different dynamic. And we're driving, and we get out to the town, which is a small college town. Villanova is just down the street. But Bryn Mawr is a very small, old money college town. And the very first sign in town is Lower Merion Cricket Club. So Lower Merion is the name of the county. Cricket Club. Zach, cricket. Like, who plays cricket? Okay. I mean, I know who plays cricket. British people play cricket, and British protectorates and British colonized anyway.
Yeah.
So I see the sign, Cricket Club, and then under the sign says no coloreds or Jews allowed here. No coloreds or Jews allowed here. And this is 1989.
Wow.
And people are always shocked when I share that. Like, really?
Yeah,
the sign didn't come down till 2012.
Right. And
right.
It's
And so
still on the deeds too of the houses. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I was in for a rude awakening. And I knew in that moment, I'm in trouble because I'd studied history. I knew what this meant. And I had worked so hard to get to America. I was not about to be the only student not to go to college from my graduating class. And so I said nothing. My parents did not know. They didn't know about that sign. And my freshman year was a repeat of that sign. I mean, all throughout the year, about 2 weeks into college, a white woman on campus walked up to me and just matter-of-factly said to me, you're only here because we have to have 10 of you. And I didn't even understand what she meant. And so I asked her, so what do you mean, 10 of me? 10 of who? She said, well, 10 Black girls. You're only here because we have to have 10 Black girls. And what do you mean 10 Black? Like, I don't even understand that. And she said, affirmative action. You don't know what affirmative action is? And I said, no. And I was dumb enough that I walked to the admissions office right across the street and asked to see the director. I feel so bad for whoever was the admissions officer at that point. She brought me into her office and had to explain to me, this 18-year-old Black girl, that yes, you are one of the 10 here.
Wow.
Yes, you are one of our affirmative action recruits. And now, Zach, I now have to figure out, what does it even mean to be a Black girl? Like, I'm here because I'm one of the 10 Black girls, but I don't even know what that means. And so now I am so confused. And here's where, for me, the opening came for doubt in my life. For the first time, I began to really doubt myself. I had spent a lifetime of thinking, I can work hard at anything, I can get anywhere, I can do anything. For the first time in my life, oh, maybe I can't. Or maybe I didn't really earn my spot here. And I think a lot of Black and brown students at schools that are, whether it's Harvey Mudd or Princeton or Bryn Mawr, we feel like imposter syndrome anyway. Did we really do When I look back, I had a 3.9 GPA, 11 AP classes, 4 languages fluent, 3 varsity sports, 2 instruments in the band. Like, looking back now at 49, oh, I more than earned my spot there. Like, I more than earned my spot. But at 18 years old, that's all it took for me to begin to believe, Mom, maybe I didn't really earn my spot. Am I just here from my skin color?
Mm.
And then 2 weeks after that, I would be called the N-word for the first time.
Mm.
And I'll never forget that. It was like somebody had shot me. I was
Mm.
walking to the store by myself, and these 2 boys with the top down on their Jeep, big Villanova stickers on the back of their car, shouted it at me. N-word, get out of our neighborhood. And I'll never forget that. It felt like I'd been shot. And I remember running back to my dorm. I didn't even get to the store that day. I ran back to my dorm and I called my dad. I don't know why I called my dad, but I called my dad all the way in Europe. And I said, Daddy, somebody just called me the N-word. And you know what he said? My poor dad, who is the sweetest man, but just doesn't do anything but math. I mean, he just is not good with that kind of social emotional stuff. He said, honey, it means a stupid Black person, and that's not you. Click. That's all he had. That was all he had in the tank. And I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know how to respond. And that was not the last time I would be called the N-word. It was the first time of many. I stopped counting. I ended up playing basketball and being one of the stars that freshman year. We won every game. I played every single minute my freshman year. We won every game. Should have felt really great about myself. I didn't. I knew I didn't belong. When basketball was over in March of 1990, all the upperclassmen just went about their lives and nobody checked on me.
Mm.
And, you know, I will say, you appreciate this because you're out of college. Like, people tell you get into clubs, play a sport. Well, that's great while you're in season. But out of season, my coach never checked on me. The players never checked on me. And I'm in America by myself. Like, there's no cell phone, there's no email, there's no, I mean, I had zero connection to anyone. And so from March to April, I had to stop going to class. I stopped eating. I stopped taking baths. I stopped communicating with people. I would sit in my dark dorm room by myself. And the beginning of April, I started contemplating, like, what would it mean if I just didn't exist? Maybe that would make life easier for everyone. And one Saturday, first weekend in April, never forget this. I wake up one morning and the sun is shining on my face and I just feel like I'm supposed to walk. And I put my shorts and t-shirt on and just start, I don't even know where I'm walking. And I end up 2 towns outside of Bryn Mawr town, and there are Black people everywhere. And I'm like, where have these people been all this time? And it's where the help lived. It's where the Black families lived who worked in the white people's mansions, tiny little community, tiny little homes. But right in the center of this community was a basketball court. And there was a man playing there that day named Dr. Julius Irving. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know who Dr. J was. I didn't grow up in America. I knew Michael Jordan and Isaiah Thomas. I didn't know Dr. J. That was before my time. Yeah. But he was playing that day with his sons and he saw me walk in and knew that I was a ball player. And he's like, you get out here. And I would play basketball with him and his sons all day. And the lights would come on and he would go home with his boys. And I would sit on the sideline with 3 high school age Black boys, 15, 16 years old. And when they asked me, where'd you come from? Because you don't talk like us. Like, there's something not right about you. I was like, well, I'm from the Netherlands. They're like, what is that? I'm like, how do you not know where that is? Where do you go to school that you didn't learn about the Netherlands? They're like, we don't go to school. What do you mean you don't go to school? Don't you have to go to school in America? Well, we dropped out a long time ago. Our schools in Philly are overcrowded. Nobody cares about us. We don't have enough books in our class. Why would we go to school? And I said to these boys, I'm 18 years old. And I said to these boys, so what's your dream for the future? If you're not going to get a high school diploma. And all 3 boys said, we don't expect to live to be 21. Ooh. Why would we dream about a future? And it was on that basketball court in that moment that my dream was birthed. I knew for the first time in my life, I had been birthed out of the body of a white woman for a reason. I had been adopted by white people for a reason, raised in a country that believed I could be amazing for a reason. I was a ball player for a reason. I was an academic for a reason. And that was the day I knew in my heart, I'm meant to be a bridge. I'm meant to be a bridge between things. And I made a decision that day at 18 years old in that basketball court. I'm going to give the rest of my life to being a bridge and to being a champion for kids. And I remember running all the way back to the dorm, calling the operator to call my parents in Europe and tell my parents, thank you, first of all, for changing the world as teachers. I never saw teachers as world changers, but I knew in that moment, oh my gosh, my parents have been changing the world for kids for decades now. And they changed my life as teachers and as parents. And I said, thank you. And I'm never coming home.
Huh.
I know that I can't come home. I know that I was born in this country for a reason. And I know that I need to love kids who look like me in the way that you loved me. They deserve to have a you in their lives. And I'm going to be that you.
Whoa.
And we cried on the phone. Man, can you imagine my mom? Like, she's not coming back. Right. Yes, I've been in America now for 32 years. 32 years.
Wow. Wow. And that's a story. Wait, what was Dr. J like?
So we ended up playing, I think I got to play with him 2 or 3 times that summer. He's super humble. I mean, like the most amazing basketball player. And he probably was my age then. He's probably in his late 40s. I know his sons were in their 20s and they were both playing in South America. Still an amazing athlete in his late 40s. But humble. Like I've been dunked on by Dr. J, which not everyone can say. And he was not an arrogant person at all, which I really, that's the one thing I remember about him is that, I mean, he was better than everybody, but he didn't take over the game when he could have taken all 10 of us on and just dominated. But I mean, he passed the ball and he was a gentleman. He was a gentleman. People really respected him. Yeah.
Wow. Lower Marion High School is where Kobe Bryant went.
I know. He was actually there just after I graduated. But I remember that when I read his story. And of course, Kobe, like me, was raised overseas too and speaks Italian. I mean, there were lots of connections. Crazy story. I was actually in LA right where the crash happened the day before the crash.
Whoa.
Yeah, so he and I feel like in lots of ways, like Kobe and I have done this thing. Obviously, he's better than me at basketball, but I just found a lot of connections in our story, just in his growing up overseas, but also learning to speak the language and understanding the culture and kind of being that in-between space. You know, you always live in this in-between space where you're not quite enough of one thing or enough of another thing, but that makes you a bridge between both things, right? I mean, it's the good and the bad of it. You're never quite going to be on one side or on the other side, which is hard sometimes, but you get to be in the middle and connect two things together.
That liminal space, that in-between space, whether it's, you know, dancing between the raindrops of class or continents or race, it's complicated. And he was made fun of, I guess, by guys on the team where it's like, you speak Italian, like you think you're so like European, high and mighty. Like, was it difficult for you to, you know, being this person in America, but having this like all the formative years in the Netherlands, were you looked at as an outsider? I mean, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I tell people, I just posted about this a couple months ago, just with all the Black Lives Matter stuff and everything. I was posting that I will never be Black enough for some people. I will never be white enough for others. I will be too Christian for some and not Christian enough for others. I will always be Aaron enough. I will always be Aaron enough. And it took me a long time to get to that place. But, you know, when I first came to America, I really believe, I'm a person of faith, and I really believe that God gave me this super ability with basketball, and not enough to go to although I did try out for 2 WNBA teams, but I was not quite good enough for that. I was just good enough though to play street ball with guys. I mean, I was that good that I could get out and still hold my own. And that's what connected me in the Black community. So especially as a younger person in my 20s and even into my 40s, I was playing 4 or 5 days a week into my 40s. Wow. And able to play with guys on the street, still younger guys, and not afraid at all. And I feel like God gave me that to
Hmm.
connect with a community that I wasn't raised in.
Yeah.
And so that gave me credibility.
Hmm.
There was a time where I wanted to talk like people from the hood, but I realized that's not like learning another language. There's something about that, and it's not authentic for me. And so I tried it for a little bit and was like, oh, that's like cultural appropriation for me in a lot of ways. And so I just show up as my authentic self. And when people ask, where you're obviously not from here, where you, I just tell them, like, I have a complicated story and I don't talk like you because I was not raised in this country.
Yeah.
And when kids hear that, it's like they want to know more. They're really curious about it.
Yeah.
But my ability as a basketball player allows me entree into a community that did I not have basketball, I may not have entree into.
Huh.
So basketball has really been my ticket into spaces that I may not otherwise. And then the interesting thing is, once I started wearing my hair natural, that was another entree into community, like an automatic connection to community that I didn't have when I wore my hair straight. And I wore my hair straight till I was 40. And then at 40, just said, why am I trying to be someone else's pretty? I just need to do me.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a ton of pressure. When you're the one Black person in spaces, there's a ton of pressure to conform and assimilate and be professional. Well, now I challenge anybody to tell me this is not professional. Right? This is how my hair grows out my head. So I dare you to tell me this is not professional.
Well, isn't that the Malcolm X thing of who taught you to hate yourself, right? And it's
right. And so now I wear my hair this way for two reasons. I want young people to see me and know that they can be their full selves. Yeah. Just like do you. Whatever you is, whether you is straight blonde hair or you is super curly red hair, do you, however you show up. You know, and I'm 6 feet tall. So I'm 6 feet tall plus like the half foot of hair. And I just own that. I just own that now. But I also do it as a way to give away some of the privilege of being light skinned and having straight hair. And it's a choice for me too, to show up and kind of push on these norms of what professional is supposed to look like, what accomplished is supposed to look like. I'm going to show up like this and be about us, just like this. And it's not a political statement. So there's a difference. It's not a political statement, but it is pushing against norms. Societal norms, and saying, you know what, you all don't get to decide those norms. I'm going to push up against them, and I'm going to be good at what I do. And I dare you to tell me that I can't come with my full self.
I love it. I love it. So I want to get to your political career and the stuff that you're doing now, but I want to get into some of the, because there's some K through 16 educators who may be tuning in. You worked as a foreign language educator. You worked as a diversity and inclusion director, or equity and accessibility. Tell us about those roles and what you experienced in those spaces.
So I started in 91, 92, 93, working in schools in Philly, wherever I could get opportunities to be around kids. I was like, I literally took a train into Philadelphia 3 days a week to volunteer in a special ed classroom in North Philadelphia. 2 hours. It took me 2 hours to get there. One of the toughest communities, poorest. I loved it. One of the things I learned there is that, you know, we tell this story about America that poor and Black is bad and that there's nothing good there. And what I learned from this teacher that I trained under is that, man, there's jewels everywhere. There's rubies and diamonds and sapphires everywhere. And she found it. And she taught me to be a treasure hunter, really as a young person, early in my 20s, to look for treasure. She said it's in everyone, whether they have money or not, whether they're homeless or not, there's treasure in every kid. And she modeled that, absolutely. And her name was Sheila Drupevsky. I'll never forget her. She was biracial. She was one of the most beautiful human beings ever. And then I would go on to teach. I didn't get a degree in teaching because Bryn Mawr and all of the other Ivy League colleges believed that teaching was beneath them. So if you get accepted at these colleges, you should go do something worthwhile, not teach. And so none of those colleges had teaching programs. And so I had to get a degree in something else. And I ended up getting my degree in literatures of the African diaspora in English, French, and Spanish. Because I had grown up reading dead white people my whole life. And I was like, nope, I need to read about people like me. And I love language. And so I got 3 language degrees and studied Black folks from the diaspora and just loved that. I love that. So my first experience was special ed. And then I got to Notre Dame where my husband was doing his graduate work. And we didn't have the money to put me through graduate school to get a teaching degree there. But a private school athletic director happened to see me playing basketball somewhere, and he said, oh, we need you at our private school, and we happen to have an English position open. So some of you may have heard of a guy named Pete Buttigieg. Maybe you've heard of him. So I taught 6th grade English where he did 8th grade. So at the same time I was teaching 6th grade, he was in the 8th grade at the school that I taught at in South Bend, Indiana. He was just Pete. I didn't know he was just little Pete. I didn't know who he was, but I taught literally 2 doors down from Pete Buttigieg, y'all. So I taught. Cool?
What was he like?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember him. I don't remember him. I just know he was there. So he was probably just like every other little kid there. They were all of those kids. There were 5 Black kids on scholarships at the school, and then all these rich, like Notre Dame professors' kids.
Wow.
And then me, I was the first and only ever Black teacher hired.
Wow.
And that was an experience to be in this very elite school. And I know I was their diversity hire. I know that now looking back. And I know that I was the acceptable one because, of course, I was from Europe. And I had a degree from Bryn Mawr, which everyone appreciated there. I could speak languages. So I ended up getting pregnant, and my husband, they let me co-teach with my husband. So when I go on maternity leave, my husband, who's doing his graduate work at Notre Dame, takes over for me. Now, my husband is a large Black man, ex-football player, earning his master's degree at Notre Dame, but he's a loud urban Black guy. And we learn in that experience that, okay, we know why they hired Erin. They didn't know that her spouse was not going to be like her. And that was an interesting study in DEI and in what's acceptable. As long as you come culturally like us, we're fine. But if you try to push, and my husband is not one to assimilate. He's not one to, he knows he's smart. He's very smart. We produced Izzy because we're both pretty smart people. So Zach knows my son who got one wrong on his SAT. Like, our son is brilliant. But my husband is no slouch. Like, he has 3 master's degrees now. So, but he is not quiet. And he's an ex-football player. He's a large Black man. He's loud. He's a great teacher. But he was unacceptable to so many of those people. Man, the parents weren't sure what to do with him. They were intimidated. He's not intimidating. He's just big and Black. But that was interesting. So I did that for a couple years, and then we moved. He ended up going to Bible college to become a youth pastor, and we ended up out here in Washington State 24 years ago, so he could be the youth pastor at the church he'd grown up in. And so I had started with a school in my garage. So when we moved here to Washington State, I knew I had 2 Black boys at the time, and I knew what public school did to Black boys. So I made the choice to not teach right away. I opened a school in my garage, and I was just homeschooling my kids, but the neighborhood learned about it, and we ended up with 15 kids in our little garage school. And then I would go back to teaching. I substitute taught. My principal watched how well I worked in schools, and he got a scholarship for me to Pacific Lutheran University to get like a really fast track teaching certificate. And that's how I got certified here in Washington. So, but yeah, I've taught English, I've taught French immersion. So every subject in French. I've taught history, math, PE, science, literally everything. I've taught just about every subject area.
Wow. So, for K through 16 educators who are listening, what's some advice that you would give them, and or if you don't like that question, systemically, what are some of the things that you think need to be changed?
So for K-6 educators, and I know my friend Courtney's watching right now. So I know we've got at least one of my friends watching who's an educator.
Awesome.
Number one, we have to help our students to be their, we have to allow our students to be their full selves. So one of the things that I have come to believe in, and I am a great teacher, I still teach now. I'm a great teacher because I allow students to show up as their full selves, whether they are boisterous or super quiet, whether they are extrovert, introvert, whether their skill is drawing or whether it's speaking. I believe schools often shut down kids and they ask them to show up in this little box, like show up and dress this way and talk this way and walk through the halls a certain way and do homework this way. And this is what we expect a good kid to look like. And I really believe that we have to create space for students to bring their full self to the classroom. And so one of the best practices for teachers is, and if you're especially a middle school teacher where you have students for an hour at a time or 40 minutes at a time, in each period, you should create space for kids to be louder and more kind of move a little bit and use their voices, and space for them to be quiet. So during a period of time, every kid should have a time and space in that classroom to be fully themselves. And then help students realize that we each show up in different ways. So they should be learning about their own selves. Like, what am I good at? What are the ways that I show up? And really, I believe you can start doing that with really little people. Second, third grade students can already begin to kind of unpack, what are the ways that I learn? What are my favorite ways to learn? What are the things that I struggle with? How do we tackle those? And then learn that, okay, I'm really good at this, but my partner over here is really good at that. Begin to unpack, what are the ways we can work together and cooperate to do things? If I'm a great artist and you're a great writer, then how do we get kids working together to realize you don't all have to be great at everything? Right? Each of us has our strengths. And so I think what I'm good at is helping students, first of all, find their own strengths, and then also figure out how to work well with others. And what I told my students every year, whether I was teaching fourth graders or 10th graders, is I expect you to love your fellow students. You don't have to like them all the time. I expect you to love them. And here's what I mean by love. I mean, everyone deserves dignity and everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect, even if you don't like them, even if you don't agree with them, they don't listen to the same kind of music, they don't have the same sense of fashion. Everyone deserves to be respected and treated like a valuable human being. And in my classroom, I just didn't tolerate any less. And what my students learned is they learned to appreciate each other. And what is really awesome is to watch. I was really fortunate when I taught middle school at my last middle school to have my students, I cycled with them. So I had them 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And to watch them over time, my group that I had for 3 years, I had an autistic kid who was really nerdy. I love nerds, so a nerd to me is not a bad word, but he was super nerdy and just not cool at all, which I totally identified with that because that was totally me growing up. It's funny because I think kids think I'm cool now, and I find that hysterical because I was so not cool as a middle school kid. So I think it's funny that middle school kids think I'm really cool because that was not me as a middle school kid, but he was totally nerdy, but the kids loved him. They learned to really appreciate, you know what, he just does things different than us. And that's not a bad thing. And so I think if we can help, especially early childhood, so from kindergarten to 6th grade, especially, if we can help students see that different is not bad and it's not weird, it's just different. And if we can help our students realize that, man, there's something beautiful about each of you, and stop trying to be someone else's smart and someone else's pretty and someone else's strong. Stop trying to compare yourself to other people. It's natural, it's human nature, but as much as we can as teachers, get kids to check in on their own story and be the authors of their own story and look at their own self in the mirror, and stop trying to look at yourself and then look at that other and try to mirror. Stop that. You're going to fail at being someone else's best self. So just focus on being your best self.
I love that. I love that. So you took us to the micro level of the classroom, and I know you ran for office to do the macro change. So what were some of the things that you were hoping to change in Washington State? And what was that experience like?
So can I share what if I could dream up a school system right now, could I share that with you, especially
Really?
based on this last year of so by the way, I started teaching online March 16th. So I lost all of my consulting contracts on March 12th. Everything evaporated. So I went from really full schedule to zero from March to June and just made the decision. I felt like, again, I'm a person of faith. I felt like God said, "What's in your hands?" And I said, "Well, a computer and social media and a love for teaching." So I felt like I was supposed to just go online and teach. So I did. I taught adults every day. I did a read aloud in 4 languages every morning. And then I did a class for middle and high school kids every afternoon for an hour for 83 days in a row.
Wow.
83 days in a row. So one of my lessons to y'all is whatever's in your hand, give it away. Give it away. Because when you hold on tight to the little bit you have, you also cannot receive more. So I just gave it away, gave it away. And what was really cool, my husband is watching me like prepare lesson plans every day. Like I was writing lesson plans, just like I was back in the classroom, which I had not done for a long time because I'd been an administrator. I think it is so important for administrators and state level leaders to get back in classrooms because I think too often, and it's one of the reasons I ran for state soup, is I see too many of those big level leaders who have not done the work of teaching in so long that they are writing policy that makes no sense to the person who's on the ground actually having to implement the policy. And so I felt really clear that back in March of last year, I needed to go online and just be reminded, what is this teaching thing? And so I went online and started teaching. And 2 weeks in, my husband said, "Honey, don't you have 20,000 followers on social media?" I said, "Yeah, honey." And he said, "Well, why don't you reach out to them and have them come speak in your classroom? Like that could be your class. Who are the change agents in your life already? Why don't you just bring them into your class?" So I did. And so my students got to meet 2 former NFL players, a professional basketball player in Europe, the first Black Supreme Court justice, the first Asian Supreme Court justice, authors, an Emmy nominated spoken word artist. Like they got to meet some really amazing, amazing, amazing people in my classroom. So here's the first thing that I would say on the big macro level. What does that have to do with the macro level? We are not leveraging technology in the ways we could. And so one of the things I said, even by June, is why aren't we using, like we have a state TV station, TVW. Every state has some sort of like government TV station. Why aren't we leveraging that? Everyone has access to it. Why aren't we getting authors and poets and government officials and interesting people, professional athletes and musicians to give us 20 minutes of their time to share their stories, their failures, their successes. If you want to get to where I am, here are the kinds of things that I did. Like, why aren't we leveraging? Because here's the deal with technology right now. I had somebody that joined me from Ivory Coast. They joined me at I forget what time it was in the morning for them, like 4 o'clock in the morning, but they joined my class from the Ivory Coast and my students got to meet someone in the continent of Africa. We are missing the boat in public education on the big level to expose our students to the amazing that exists all over the world. And so I would love to see on the macro level that we leverage technology to provide some instruction and to provide some connection so that teachers don't have to do all of it. They don't have to do all that. I mean, kids are watching TikTok videos. They're checking out Instagram. Why aren't we using those platforms or something like it to connect students to stuff that they actually care about? Right? I mean, seriously. I mean, if kids want to be musicians, why haven't we created a bunch of online content that students all over the country could access? Right? So that's one of the things that I learned just doing this program. The other thing that I learned on the macro level is, and you mentioned this earlier today, mental health. Our students, I mean, I think I've known that our students needed mental health support, but I think this has further exposed how desperately our students need mental health support. And yet, I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, we pulled our psychologists out of schools, we pulled counseling, we don't have money for it. We can't afford not to invest in that. We can't afford not to invest in that. And so I would love to see us really invest And I have a friend right now who does online counseling. She's a Black woman who got her degree in counseling and then went back and did training in how do I counsel BIPOC students? How do I counsel specifically Black and brown girls? And she does virtual online counseling. So why do I say this? Because I think an argument always is we don't have enough people of color in mental health to support. We also don't have enough teachers of color. Why couldn't we again leverage technology to make both teachers of color and counselors of color accessible to students of color? So another idea that I've had on a macro level in our state, I think California is ahead of us, but in our state, we're talking about rolling out some ethnic studies curriculum. And I always worry about that because I worry that if people don't have the proper background, you can actually do harm presenting ethnic studies. Okay, if you have some major biases, which I know lots of teachers do, sometimes it's known and other times they aren't aware that they have these huge gaps and blind spots. You can do greater harm. What if we were to create a cohort of educators, and they don't all have to be educators of color, but I think it'd be really awesome if 80% of those educators were educators of color who delivered that content in ethnic studies online, so that white students and BIPOC students would have access to now seeing adults of color who are experts and professional educators. And I think that would benefit everyone. So I think my big learning in the last year, I've done 1,000 hours on Zoom now, at least so many hours on Zoom. We're not leveraging Zoom, the very thing that we're on right now, to expose students in the ways I think we could. But here's my biggest learning is that when people are in crisis, they're not creative.
Right.
So when leaders are in crisis and it's tyranny of the urgent, it's almost impossible for them to think outside the box. And so what they will naturally pivot back to is what they know. And so we will naturally pivot back to the way things were a year ago if we're not intentional about getting creative. And so I would love to create space for us to just breathe and get creative. I want us to breathe and get creative. And I think our students right now have a lot to teach us. I think there are a lot of teachers out there that have a lot to teach us. And there are a lot of teachers and students who have a lot to teach decision makers about what normal should look like, especially starting in August. And I worry a little bit that people aren't going to listen.
Do you think we can create a new improved normal in August?
I think we could, but it's going to mean that we're intentional from right now to August. I think it's going to require, and what I'm seeing is so many education leaders panicked trying to get back to hybrid. I got to create the perfect hybrid plan. And instead of dreaming about, I've watched a couple superintendents now say, you know what, we're going to stay online till June. And we're going to spend this time and invest it in how do we go back differently in August. And that's what I'm hoping will happen. I'm hoping that people will really be intentional and convene some folks and really have some honest dialogue about what is working, what's not working. What do we hold on to? Here's what I worry about. I worry we go back in August and we just don't do Zoom anymore. We just go back to the same, when there are times when students are actually benefiting from Zoom. So how do we do a hybrid going back? And I'll just throw this out there too for teachers watching. I have not yet met a Black or brown student who doesn't feel a bit more free being online than when they were in school. And I can't tell you how many students, even before George Floyd, said, this is the first time I've been able to breathe. Because I get to learn in the context of my own home, in my own room, with my people around me. And I don't have to assimilate and worry about all the ways that white school spaces are pressing down on me. But I've also heard that from Black and brown teachers. So I just want to offer that I think there is some learning to be done there about the toxic environments and And I would say anything is toxic that requires people to leave a piece of themselves outside.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think this is an opportunity to really interrogate, is your space affirming and empowering to the people you want to be in it?
Because folks don't have to do the double consciousness thing if they can actually be in their safe space and learn. Yeah. And go into these toxic white spaces. You know, a lot of the stuff that you said is brilliant, and it's almost going on a TikTok, going on to you know, having people be loud and then be soft, and stop comparing myself to this. These are ways that people learn naturally in society, but then something happens, we get into a classroom and like, no, it has to be like this. And there's so much on assessment, right? Where we assess.
I didn't talk about that yet. Yes.
No, what, are we gonna keep doing all the assessment stuff and giving so much money to all these?
We gotta stop it. We gotta stop it. We gotta stop it. We are testing to test to test. There are millions of dollars being spent on developing tests and grading tests and proctoring tests and tests and tests and tests. And here's the deal. You know, I came to America right at the beginning of No Child Left Behind, and I think there was good intention in it. I think there was good intention. And what I say to educators all the time, and particularly white educators, is racism actually doesn't require you to be a bad person. Doing bad things doesn't require you to be a bad person. I think most decision makers really want to do the right things, but most decision makers aren't actually talking to the people in the classroom. They're not talking to the students who are being impacted in the classroom, right? And so they're making decisions based on what they know from having been in a classroom as a kid. It's like saying, you know, I know how to do surgery because I had a surgery, right? But we don't have that same concern with decision makers on education. We just assume that because you went to school and you sent your children to school, you now get to be the expert on school, even if you've never spent a day teaching in a classroom. You've never spent a day as an administrator in a school building. And so, I mean, one of the things I would love to see is that whether it's school board members or state superintendents or state directors have to spend so much time in classrooms. I mean, I would love to see that. I think it's really necessary. And I think there has to be some sort of mandate that you have to get feedback from people on the ground before laws are passed. But state assessments, I think, are killing us. I think, and what's interesting is, you know, when the pandemic hit last year, it was the first thing to go was the state test. They're like, we're not going to test. Well, okay, if it's the first thing to go, then is it really necessary? Right? And so I think we need to have some conversations about what is assessment? What is assessment? Assessment shouldn't just be a test. And that's what it has come down to, is a series of tests. But I really believe it's far beyond time for us as a society to talk about what is assessment? What does it mean? And great teachers understand there's formative assessment, and there's different ways to assess things. And I would argue, if I could have my dream school space, I want high expectations for every kid, but that doesn't mean every kid hits the same test score. You know, I have 3 children, and Israel is my super brainy, loves math. Any test you give him, he's going to ace it. That's just who he is. And even though he can ace the test, that's not what stretches him. I know for him, he's creative and he likes to use both his math and his creative skills. That's why he got honors. I don't know if you realize this, but he got honors in both English and mathematics when he graduated. So he received honors cords in both, right? Like, what kid gets that? Who gets that? Usually it's one or the other. And so for Izzy to push him to be his best, I got to push him on both sides and say, man, Izzy, I want you to find a project where you're both pushing your math brain and your writing brain. For my other child, Malachi, he's very much hands-on. He's a singer. He can put anything to music. He can remember anything by music, can't write a lick. He's dysgraphic. He can't write. So to test him in the way that I test Izzy, to push him in the way that I push Izzy, would destroy Malachi. It would
Mm,
absolutely destroy him because he can't show his learning in the
mm,
same way that Izzy can write
mm,
anything in a heartbeat. He can write anything. Malachi can sing anything.
mm,
He can hear something once in any language and repeat it back to
mm,
you on perfect pitch.
mm,
And so for Malachi, I would test him and I would challenge him in different ways. Our other child is a writer, but in a very different way from Izzy. She's a creative writer.
mm,
She's amazing with technology and more social media stuff. And
mm,
that's what she does. She builds websites and does social media for an education organization. And so I would push her in a different way. I wish schools would help children find their strengths and
mm,
passions and then help them build a path to becoming better in those things. So I
mm,
think there are some basic skills everybody needs to know, basic reading, writing, math. But I think we're trying to get every kid to one place,
mm,
but every kid is not the same person.
mm,
I wish we could build independent plans for each kid
mm,
and allow greater creativity and help kids understand, okay, if this is your dream for your future, we probably need to get you to a 4-year degree. If this is your dream for your future, then like technical school is probably going to be better for you because they'll have a better culinary arts program. If this is your dream, I need to get you an internship with this
mm,
person. Right. And I would love to see, we talk all the time about differentiated instruction and
mm,
but we don't have a system for that. We have the system that's built for one child and
mm,
every child is supposed to measure up in the same way. And I think on the macro level, that's really problematic. It's really, really, and here's the other reality. If we say that every kid needs 4-year college, if every child in America were to apply to a 4-year college, there's not even enough room,
mhm,
nor is there enough money. And so we're saying that in every way that we can. If you're really a student in America, you should really get a 4-year college. Like any good kid gets it. That's a bunch of baloney. Some of the richest people in America did not finish college, didn't go to college, right? So we're saying out of one side of our mouth, in order to be a good American, you got to get a 4-year degree. But out of the other side of our mouth, people like Gates and other folks don't even have college degrees. Right. And so I think let's get real. Let's get real about what does it mean to get kids to their dream and how do we help them get there in a way that is inspiring, challenging,
mm,
and
mm,
inspiring.
mm, mm. Let's leave it. Boom. Let's leave it on that. Yeah, mic drop. Wow. Wow. The hour flew by. I wish we could talk more, but maybe we'll stay after and just and catch up and see how you're doing. But folks that tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. Check out communityworksinstitute.org, where there's professional development opportunities for K through 16 educators. This was really special. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. This is great. Thank you, everybody. Tune in again for the Spotlight series on Friday and Sunday, and check out the website. We appreciate you. Peace. Take care.